Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update today, reaching you from the studios of Trust Television here in Abuja, Nigeria's capital. This week on the program, we're taking a look at happenings on the continent. Do stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. It's the Africa Update, and I'm your host, Chiamaka. Nwafor. Now, as I said before we went on that short break, we'll be looking at happenings on what's taking place on the continent. And one of the big issues this week is the issue of the situation in Kenya, where we see that a blogger was killed apparently in police detention. But let's take a look at this report.
They're demanding justice for Albert Ojwang, a name largely unknown until news emerged of his death in a Kenyan police cell. The 31-year-old teacher had apparently tarnished the name of a senior police official on social media. The initial police statement? He died after hitting his head on the cell wall. A statement that rights activists who viewed Ojwang's body find hard to believe.
The body was swollen. And he had bruises. He had bruises here, somewhere on the face, on the shoulder, here on the elbow. So really you see that, and it doesn't look like someone who was hitting their head on the wall.
This is just a small crowd of protesters who've walked from City Mortuary, and they're walking to the central business district of Nairobi. They're angry about the death of Albert Ojwang, and they're asking questions around his death.
The police have removed officers involved in the case. Kenya's independent police watchdog says it started questioning officers and witnesses.
I also visited the scene myself, the cell where he died, and there's a lot of blood on the floor, on the walls. It's quite sad really to see that picture.
Many are viewing Ojwang's arrest and death as yet another abuse of police power. Since the youth protests last year, over 60 deaths allegedly linked to the police are being investigated.
Quite a sad one over there for that journalist. And it begs the question, what really happens to us as people will go out there to get the stories, to speak about what's happening, to bring up the reports, to unveil the truth, to do these investigations. But joining me to further converse and discuss these conversations and other matters is Dr. Amadi. He's the Director Abuja School of Social and Political Thought. Good afternoon, Dr. Amadi. Thank you for joining Africa Update today.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much.
I'm certain that you think that report and you've heard the stories. What's your take on the situation in Kenya?
It's like striking a match on the tinderbox, because Kenya had a very enduring, long public protests around questions of good governance. Since 2023, there's been this issue, and of course, a massive one that forced in 2024 the government to make some changes that the youth groups consider not adequate. I mean, it was so big that it could actually threatened the stability of the Kenyan presidency. This again adds to this civic unrest that's convulsing Kenya. Kenya is a long-lasting African democracy, one of the countries with the highest literacy and human capital in Africa, with a strong, community of IT, Swavi, young people, literati, smart guys, and of course, freedom-loving youths. And so you would expect that there will be some kind of turbulence, especially with bad governance. And of course, lately, Kenya has somewhat been trapped in the same level of sometimes state institutions that have been basically motivated and governed by some fascist authoritarian impulse. So it's not clear now to know whether this was purely accidental, as the head of police are saying, or whether this is a planned killing of this blogger. We can only extrapolate that across Africa, there's a growing incidence of state repression and intolerance to journalists, to people in social media who are somewhat exposing failures in governance across the continent. So it might be one of those instances, like we have here with Didiati, who was killed and missing, and several other instances of journalists and social commentators and critics suffering, state repression. So it could be either of them. But for now, I think government should be more thorough, organize a very true independent inquiry, and be more transparent so as to, abort what could be a major second phase of a massive social uprising.
Okay, now we've seen, like you mentioned earlier, the situation that happened in Kenya too, with that uprising about the finance bill, and now this. How does will this in any way have an impact on the upcoming elections and government policies?
I think it will have if it's protracted, because look, the incumbent government is not that popular as such. If you look at they managed to win, and not like decisively, and it has been for a long time. There's been some growing radical opposition. Bob Wine and others have tried to put together something that looks more like a radical opposition to the ruling autocracy. So I think that if it's not well managed, it is going to build up towards election, and has a capacity to further make the government that's not very popular, even more so unpopular. And that Kenya elections are better than, in sense, Nigeria election, that you don't have the level of state control of the apparatus. Whether it's the Electoral Commission has proved to be much more independent than we have here, and so you're going to see a better. It's more competitive, and so if this unpopularity continues and it kind of extends towards election time, it might spell a disaster for the ruling government.
All right, now let's look at it for journalists. Now, what could we say that this would spell for digital freedom, and even for journalists, not just in Kenya, but even in Africa as a whole?
Well, it could have a chilling effect. I mean, if authorities, whether police or secret police or official state police, could perhaps treat bloggers, journalists in such a manner, or if there's growing risk of critics and journalists losing their life, it could impact on the ability of these institutions to play their role well.
So now,
so it could affect it can have a chilling effect on the courage and commitment of journalists. And in fact, it can also inflame and perhaps draw more activism. But I don't think it's enough to discourage. I mean, journalists and bloggers and social critics know that they are running a risk dealing in these areas.
Okay. Let's move on to other conversations. We see that the Southern African Development Community, SADC, said on Thursday that it will begin the final phase of withdrawing its troops from the conflict-hit Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. Let's take a look at this report.
The Southern African Development Community SADC said Thursday it will begin the final phase of withdrawing its troops from the conflict-hit Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. The first withdrawal saw hundreds of troops leave the DRC through Rwanda and Tanzania, where they flew to their respective countries in the southern region. Despite the withdrawal, the bloc reaffirmed its commitment to supporting peace, security and political stability in the DRC and the broader SADC region. Their mandate ended in March this year and began withdrawing its troops and equipment the following months, despite the ongoing conflict and threats posed by the M23 rebels in the volatile East. The mission suffered heavy losses in the previous months, with dozens of soldiers from South Africa, Malawi and Tanzania killed as the M23 rebels seized control of Goma. M23 is one of about 100 armed groups that have been vying for a foothold in the mineral-rich Eastern Congo in a decades-long conflict that has created one of the world's largest humanitarian crises.
So it's here, finally, they're beginning to go through the final phase of withdrawing from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Now, the SADC, that's the South African Development Community Army, was deployed to help sort out the issue there. Now, Dr. Amadi, my first question will be, there's nothing that can be done right now. We can't say that they're going to call them back. This is them finally leaving the DRC. What are we expecting as the fallout?
DRC is not yet stabilized. I mean, a couple of days there were attacks, of course, and killings in some of the Indoma and some of the areas. But again, the SADC has already announced that they're going to have phased withdrawal, and they have started. So the idea here is two points are clear. One is perhaps a sense in which they think the level of violence and conflict is reduced. Qatar has tried to mediate solutions, and so maybe the leadership of Southern African Development Community thinks that things are going to get better and not worse. Again, there's also a limitation to how much these countries are prepared to spend. South Africa and Malawi, Tunisia, and of course Tanzania, they have also suffered casualties. So at a point, there's fatigue and a sense in which they have to plan some kind of exit and then, ask the soldiers to return back to their various countries. But one hopes that this withdrawal is not too early, that things will not get worse quickly, and then there will be a need for another peacekeeping force. They've been around for some time, and they have helped to control the situation. But again, we are still dealing with a very volatile and a very unstable country. And the conflicts, and of course, the M23, the rebel groups are still actively, attacking, strongholds and installations and formations of the DRC, the ruling government. So we just hope that the exit will not complicate the situation. And again, and hope that maybe the American mineral deal with DRC would perhaps create opportunity for a more stable and reduce the conflict and, of course, the attack from the rebel groups.
Okay, so now the SADC, can we say that they had an impact in the DRC? Were they able to actually help to curtail or reduce the spread of this tension and crisis in the DRC?
Definitely, they have to protect, make it more difficult for rebels to strike and protect some vulnerable communities. But again, resolving the underlying conflicts, helping to give the government forces decisive victory, because we see Tangier is still, somewhat a stalemate in some sense. So yes, success to the extent that they have helped to protect, minimize impact, and protect vulnerable communities, but not in any sense that they have maybe significantly shifted the war in a way that the government forces are fully in charge and able to ward off rebel attacks. That has not yet happened.
Okay, now, are we going to see this withdrawal as some sort of diplomatic failure, or more like a necessary shift toward political stability for DRC?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
How do we see this withdrawal? Is it more like a diplomatic failure, or more or turning it towards political stability for the DRC?
I think it's difficult to predict. I think that's going to be more of, if you ask me, I think these conflicts have long tenure. The previous ones they're long lasting. So we might get a diplomatic solution rather than a political solution in this instance. I think everything's tilting towards it looks more like a diplomatic solution. The underlying issues in the African conflicts and the conflict in DRC are much more difficult to resolve politically. And so you could expect that you're going to have more of a diplomatic solution. And some theorists argue that the real solutions come from fatigue when the rebels themselves are all fatigued, they don't have access to weapons, they're weak, they're demoralized, and then they just have to get to the table and settle the matter, but not from any principled resolution of the underlying issues.
All right, now, before we move on to our other conversation, the areas that the SADC have been protecting, securing, do you think that the DRC's army, that's the FARDC, are ready to take charge? What do we expect to happen to those areas when they finally exit? Because right now, as it is, their equipment, their logistics, they have left. That was on April 29. But right now, it's now the phasing out of the human capital out of that place. What do we expect to happen to these areas that were being secured by the SADC? Is the FRADC ready? Are they capable of keeping it safe and secure?
Well, if you go by what has happened the last couple of days, there have been some sporadic attacks and killings. My prediction would be that maybe those places will be vulnerable for a significant period of time. I'm not sure they're able to protect those territories that SADC military peacekeeping forces are leaving. I mean, the final exit of personnel will signal perhaps to the rebel that these places are vulnerable. I do not think the government forces are in a good position to effectively is a word, effectively protect all these areas. Again, that's the reason why the peacekeeping forces came in the first place. So we should expect two things. One is that likely it could embolden the rebels to really perhaps try to take over some of those territories now, or except that the war they have been demoralized and decapitated significantly their power. Then we could see some sporadic guerrilla kind of attacks once in a while, but maybe not much to redefine and open real conflagration.
Okay, so now to another conversation, which is equally an exit happening in Mali. We see that the Wagner Group has announced its withdrawal from Mali after it's termed it mission accomplished. Russia's Wagner mercenary group says it is leaving Mali, declaring its mission to support the country's military against jihadist insurgents accomplished. In a statement, Wagner claimed it had stabilized the country, destroyed terrorist infrastructure, and trained local forces. The group began operating in Mali in 2021, shortly after French forces withdrew. Its presence was welcomed by the ruling junta, but drew international criticism over alleged human rights abuses, including the 2022 Moura massacre, which claims both Wagner and Mali governments have denied. Now, Wagner's departure comes amid broader restructuring under Russia's Ministry of Defense following the death of founder Yevgeny Prigozhin. While the group calls the exit voluntary, analysts say shifts in geopolitics may be behind the move. Now, Mali's government is yet to comment on the issue. Now, Dr. Amadi, back to you. First of all, you can see that the Wagner Group, these exits are happening across the African continent, over the DRC, the East Africa, even here in Mali, West Africa. Wagner is saying that they've done mission accomplished. Is that correct?
Well, it's always difficult to know whether they're right. Again, don't forget that Wagner came in because Russian influence was growing in the region after the West influence waned. Russia moved in, and Russia found the Wagner Group, a private, company, an effective way of outsourcing this responsibility to the Wagner Group. And in a way, maybe they've done some good job in accomplishing the mission. The question is, was the mission? Part of it was destabilizing in a way, and part of it was helping regime protection. So they protected the juntas from counter coups and from other forms of. Don't forget that Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, all these fall into a much fragile Sahel region across West Africa and the Gulf of Guinea as well. So these are very volatile region. The Wagner Group specializes in some kind of this kind of operations that are unregulated by they're not state actors, they're not state actors acting on behalf of states. And so I think whether they have succeeded in stabilizing this regime will be dictated by what happens in days to come after they are finally handed over. It doesn't mean that the French influence, of course, this French claim they are still keeping their, mercenary, their military presence in Mali. The Wagner is folding and transferring, control to the Malian army. But if Russia's influence remains, Russia military presence remains. So I won't be surprised if the Wagner comes back. Again, Wagner is a company, and so since the death of the leader, and some will argue some kind of political crisis or conflict in Russia between them and the government. You expect that they might not be as capable of maintaining all their formations across Africa, elsewhere, where they're doing this operation. So they might tactically close down some to conserve their original strength and to deliver on their mission. So it's also a story around Wagner's own weakening capability. They just need to be more strategic in deployment of forces. And also, perhaps Mali is moving to transition. The French military presence remains. The Malian Air Force has been well trained, perhaps. It helped. They can now continue to maintain status quo. But if there's any serious attack on them, we won't be surprised to see the Wagners come back again to do some kind of mercenary work.
Okay, so what do you think? Is this exit really voluntary, or there's something else happening behind the scene that we're yet to find out? And then what do we make of Mali's supposed silence so far? They haven't said anything about this announcement from Wagner.
On the issue of whether this is just, is there more than meets the eye? I've alluded to the fact that it might be driven also by concern about their capabilities. Since the death of the founder, we should expect that Wagner is as solid, as coherent as it is. It has always been. So this must also be. This may be an original, objective to also pull back, self strength, and deal with other issues. So I think it could be partly that they have done the major thing they set out to do. But it's a contract. This is a contract. So oftentimes you have timelines, you have deliverables. So this is not like a normal national army. This is a business. So they probably have executed their part. They've got paid whatever is what it means on behalf of Russia. And then there might be a signal for them, even relationship with Russia, to move on and to fold, as a case might be, because the Russian military remains in Mali. That's what I say. Again, on the question of why the Malian government has not, said something about this, well, it might perhaps mean that they're not too happy about this. This is not something happy to report. Maybe they will keep silence. Not to suppose that they're not more vulnerable than they were before. So you might see the government not say anything because this is not a good news, and this probably they are not fully on board. So that could be one reason why we hear anything about this. And again, this is not a government, this is not a transaction that's really makes you look good. This is having a Wagner, mercenary, dark operatives be their country. It's not something you brag about. So I think perhaps we will not hear much about it.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Sam Amadi, for your insights and takes on our conversation today, starting with the situation in Kenya, over to the situation in the DRC with the SADC, moving on with the final phase of the exit from the country, and of course, here in West Africa, in Mali, Wagner announcing their withdrawal as well, citing a mission has been accomplished. Thank you so much for your takes and insights on these conversations.
Thank you.
That's what we're talking about. We're going to go on a short break. When we come back, we'll look at a package, or rather a report from South Sudan. Welcome back from that short break. Now, half of Sudan's 15 million people face severe hunger. Volunteer-run community kitchens have become lifelines for survival in the war-torn country. But since the U.S. caught aid funding in January, more than half have been forced to get short. Let's look at this report.
It's exactly 3 p.m. and with bowls in their hands, people pour into this neighborhood in Omdurman. Their kitchen, run by local religious leaders, starts serving free meals to anyone in need. Kamal Bashir, never misses a day.
If you didn't have this place, what would happen?
I'd just be angry, just be hungry all the time.
This kitchen serves thousands of meals every day. Most of the people that come here have been displaced. Like this woman, she had to flee her home because of the war.
Where I was, there was nothing at all. It was only when I arrived here that I kitchen. There was no longer a market, and then we have no money, no one works.
The system of community kitchens has developed throughout the country, allowing hundreds of thousands of people to survive. It is the volunteers who are in charge of getting groceries, sometimes at the risk of their own lives. Since the beginning of the war, 2 of them have been killed while out looking for food. This soup kitchen is entirely financed by a religious leader, Sheikh El Amin.
If this war were to last another 10 years, we would continue to do the same thing.
Rely directly on international aid. The UN says 60% of them shut down after President Trump suddenly cut US funding last January, and now the impact is being felt.
There used to be 2 pans, one here and the other there.
This community kitchen used to serve 200 meals a day.
Since American aid was cut back, there just isn't enough to keep everything running, so they've had to shut down some of the community kitchens.
Sudan is the only country in the world with a famine. 13 million people displaced, and half of them are children. This is Khartoum al-Buluk Hospital, the only one with a pediatric unit.
It's a ward for malnourished children.
Dr. Ahmad Kolari shows around. Here in this room are the most critical cases. The children here are between life and death. This boy is suffering from severe acute malnutrition. This is the case of little Amin, who arrived 2 weeks ago.
That's the size of our package today on Africa Update. Thank you for staying with us on the program. For more of our news programs and documentaries, do to follow us on our social media platforms and on our YouTube live stream. I am Chiamaka, Nwafor. Same time, same place next week. Bye for now.